We're lucky to have two different presenters here today. We're going to start out with Liz Hoy, and she works for NASA in the Carbon Cycle Ecosystem Office. She provides support for the Above project, and she is studying the influence of fires on carbon consumption in the Alaskan black spruce forests. So, no further ado.
There is a mic there if you want, and it might help. Give it next door.
I said I'm supposed to use the mic so that it will get caught in the recording. Hi, welcome. You can call me Liz Hoy, and I'm really excited to be here today. So I've done higher frequency work in Alaska. That's what my research has traditionally been, and now it's great to get to come here to the Northwest Territories and talk to you. So I'm going to present first, and I'm going to kind of go over some of the concepts of boreal forests and give a little bit of extra information about them, and then Jake's going to do his presentation about like a little bit more detail about what's happening in Northwest Territories. So, what is ecology? It's a house, the study of a house. And so, you all are here. So, just a vulnerability and resilience are kind of big words. So resilience is, let's say this is our piece of the environment. Like let's say this is the permafrost. So is it resilient? If it is changed by, let's say I'm increasing temperatures, is it changed? Does it come back? That means it's resilient. It can come back. But maybe it's very vulnerable to change, and maybe it's not going to come back the same way. And if temperatures continue to increase on it. So I got that at the drugstore. I was trying to put in practice what Stephanie's doing. So, how is the climate changing? Well, we've talked about this a lot already, so I won't spend much time on it. You can see that surface temperatures are increasing. You can see that it's departing from the averages. It's just very red all here in the Arctic, Northwest Territories as well. And if you look at these Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports, and you just see these areas of red here up in the Arctic region. So this is if we're able to do some reductions in greenhouse gases here, or if we're not, business as usual here, you just see huge changes for the Arctic. So we all know that. Okay, thresholds and tipping points. I wanted to cover this a little bit. They came up yesterday. I wanted to make sure everyone knew what a threshold and a tipping point was, and so I need a volunteer from the audience. Who's going to be my volunteer? Come on.
Laurel.
Somebody come on. It's just a little demonstration.
Good for you,
Yep.
Thank you. All right, here's your ball. Okay, so take it. We're going to just kind of roll it up here. So let's say that this is...
Throw it?
No, you're just going to just bring it up, and then... let's say this is our threshold right here. And let's say... Let's put it here and then let it fall back down. Let's say this is permafrost again, and it's within its kind of stable state. All right, it'd be better if we had like another thing you came up over here too. But let's say you're in your stable state. Permafrost is it's happy, but then let's say temperature starts to increase. So you can roll your ball up, and let's say it kind of gets almost to the top of the hill, but before it tips over here, it's reached this threshold. So you can let it go back down on this side, and it's going to come back down towards you. Okay, so if it can stay within its stable state here, then you can say it's resilient. Say we'll come back. But let's say it comes up, and let's say the temperature change is just so great, it's not going to be able to go back over there. It's reached its threshold, and instead it's going to come over here. It's reached its tipping point. So that's what. Thank you. That's your demonstration. So that's, I have it as a graphic too. So you can think about this little ball here as some aspect of the ecosystem. It could be permafrost, it could be a fire regime, it could just be the trees in the forest themselves. So right now they start off, they're in a steady, stable state. Did that turn on? Yeah. And let's say you have increasing temperature, increasing carbon levels. So your ball is going to start going up the hill. And maybe it can stay here, but maybe it's not going to be able to. Maybe it's going to move to this new steady state. Thanks. So that's what a threshold is. That's what a tipping point is. If it's resilient, it might go partway up the hill, but then come back down. If it's vulnerable, it might go over the top of the hill. So what disturbances occur in boreal forests? We've talked a lot about them, but I wanted to kind of frame them in terms of different types of disturbance and how it looks on the landscape. So there are different kinds of disturbance. One is called a press disturbance, and that's where we take this ball and we just start to press on it. Something's going to happen to it.
I'm sorry, what kind of disturbance?
This is called a press
A
disturbance.
press. Oh, thanks.
It's up.
Oh, there's.
That's called a press disturbance. So increasing temperature would be like a press disturbance, where you start to push on that ball, you push on it and you push on it, and eventually maybe your temperature's going to go back down, you're going to have less disturbance, or maybe you're going to pop your ball. Let's say it's a balloon, it's going to pop. So you could see things like gradual active layer thickening. You could see shorter winters and even maybe changing migration patterns. But if you have a pulse disturbance, if that balloon actually pops, you could see slumping. You could see a thermokarst. Increased fire, flooding. You've already had some very large fire years here recently. So that would be called a pulse disturbance, where all of a sudden you have a huge disturbance, like fire. And then there's another kind, that is kind of like a ramp disturbance. So you have a little bit of disturbance and then a little bit more and a little bit more. So a drought would be an example of that. So you start to stress out the trees, and then it gets a little drier and you stress them out and a little bit more. And eventually, maybe you get some rain and you can say that the area is resilient. The trees can maybe come back. But if you have a drought throughout the entire season, maybe at that point you're going to have a kind of a pulse then, and those trees might come back. You might have some tree mortality. Oh, thanks. Okay. Great, thank you. So that's my primer on press and pulse disturbances, vulnerability, resilience, and thresholds and tipping points. What are the impacts to the ecosystems? So I'm going to spend just a few slides going through and talking about some of the changes that we might be seeing in the boreal forest, and then Jacob's going to go into some of these in a little bit more detail. So after a forest fire, you have this successional trajectory, where first your herbs start to grow, and then you go into this shrub stage, and then you have a young forest up into this climax forest. So if you had a black spruce before the burn, you may come back and have black spruce again. In Alaska, we're seeing changes where you may not come back as black spruce again. You're burning so much of the organic material that you might go back and you might end up with a shrub or a deciduous stand instead. So there are questions here in the Northwest Territories as to what's going to come back after a burn. And that's something that researchers are actively looking at right now. Permafrost stability. You can see changes in climate are influencing permafrost. We just had a presentation this morning talking about water discharge, and some of it is due to permafrost thaw. And this is an example of a positive feedback. I thought I'd throw another ecology term in there for you. So this one's, you can kind of see how this is a feedback loop though. So your temperature increases, that's the plus. Your permafrost thaws, that's another plus. And the permafrost releases carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere, that's another plus. And carbon dioxide in the atmosphere causes temperatures to rise even more. So that's what a positive feedback loop is. It's just where one thing leads to another and they kind of exacerbate one another. What are the impacts to the ecosystem on caribou? As temperatures increase, as this environment starts to change, caribou populations have declined since the 1980s. This is from the GNWT. What's going to happen into the future? This is a resource that people rely on. Boreal birds. I think Peter showed this diagram the other day as well. Now you're seeing changes in migration patterns where birds are migrating at a different time than vegetation is coming out. So you have this mismatch in phase between when the birds are arriving and when the vegetation is there for them to eat. So they might get they're too early for vegetation or too late. What is the impact on pests? We're seeing more pests and just a further range of pests into the boreal forests, and Jacob's going to talk about that a little bit more. And then one of our above researchers passed me these slides. He's looking at tree mortality in boreal forests, and he's using satellite data to do it. So there has been increasing tree mortality in the North American boreal zone overall. This yellow kind of indicates the probability that there will be tree mortality in an area. So you can see here in the Northwest Territories, there's a higher probability that you might have tree mortality with increased climate change. And so he's taking satellite data and trying to look at greening and browning and other aspects of tree mortality to see if there's the potential for tree mortality to occur in an area. He might be able to let managers know before the trees die so that maybe something can be done about it. So that's something that he's actively researching right now. And will boreal forests adapt? How resilient are these systems to change? That is, as I was saying with the fire disturbance, that's something that people are still thinking about. It's still an active area of research. Some recent research by Jen Baltzer here in the Northwest Territories has shown that maybe these forested ecosystems can come back after fire. They've seen that the burns haven't been severe enough to lead to the changes that are happening in Alaska, where you might come back as a different forest type after fire, but you might instead actually come back as black spruce or jack pine, what you had before the forest. So this is still an area where people are thinking about it and really working on it. And we'll talk more about fire disturbance. I have another session tomorrow. So I believe that's all I have for mine. I wanted to stay on time.
We have a lot of challenges here in the north to look at changes that we think are going on in the forests. One of the biggest challenges here is that it's a big country and we have limited resources to even monitor for changes. So I'm going to tell you briefly about how we do it and what we see out there. You've seen similar graphics in previous 2 days before, so I'm not going to talk too much about what's shown here in those graphics. You can tell different sources show us the same things. Basically, the graph on the left shows the temperature trends actually based on recorded values from Environment Canada. So last presentation, Liz showed us data from American agencies. They're both showing the same things. Basically, the Northwest is warming much faster than every other region in North America. Changes in annual temperature occur in various places and different rates in Northwest Territories. The question is, do those changes lead to actual changes in forest ecosystems? And you would think that, yes, there's got to be a connection there. Now, are they easy to see? It's a different question. What we can infer from literature and some educated guesses here is that changes will occur in disturbance regimes. So Liz was talking a little bit about what drivers in the boreal forests exist to actually to cause these changes, and we have different disturbance regimes present at the moment. We are expecting that those regimes will change with climate change. So what we can expect, literature says that there's be more frequent and more severe fires of high intensity. There will be increase in climate-related damage, some droughts and floods, slumping caused by thawing permafrost. Shifts in pest ranges are expected. New outbreaks, secondary pests that are occurring here are expected to gain more significance, and invasive pests will become more common. That's what we hear from experts. Now, can we see that in the Northwest Territories already? I'm going to try to answer that. So, Forest Health Program in Northwest Territories is based on aerial surveys. It's a reconnaissance type of survey. We fly along the most susceptible areas that we think will be most affected. And that pretty much covers the areas along major rivers and tributaries like Mackenzie Valley, Liard River, Slave River, and also along the shores of Great Slave Lake and Great Bear Lake. So those shaded areas that you see on this map here are basically covered by our surveys. This is not a very detailed survey because it's pretty impossible to cover it the same way as southern jurisdictions do, doing them on the grid, flying very close lines, tight lines. We only fly a reconnaissance type lines, so just to give us an idea of what's going on there. The red rectangle at the bottom, along the border with Alberta and BC, is the area where we look at, specifically for mountain pine beetle presence, a pest that spread at a very rapid rate from interior BC within the last 15 to 20 years. We did see the signs of this pest around the border, and this is the area where right now we take special care of monitoring to see if it progresses. We do those surveys with collaboration with Canadian Forest Service. They have experts that help us evaluate those forests. It takes a trained eye really to see those changes on the landscape, disturbances that not only have been there, but also to see the change over time. Canadian Forest Service has been helping us with this endeavor here for many years, and we have experts coming here helping us after being here for at least 20 years, so they have a good perspective on what's been there before and how it changes. Since 2015, we also document abiotic disturbance, which means things that are related to climate, like floods, slumps, drought, and it proves to be quite difficult actually. So at the end of the survey, we produce a map that shows us the basic forest health conditions in the territories. So you can see there's different disturbance agents or pests that we map, that we are able to map from the plane. But also there's other things that we try to map, like aspen decline, that we don't associate any particular pest with, and we call it environmental decline. And flooding also has been recently mapped as something that we would like to keep track on. So let's go to some details. The most serious insect pest in the Northwest Territories is a spruce bloodworm. It's the damage is caused by larvae feeding on needles and pollen cones, sometimes in seed cones too. And the disturbance it leaves, you can see on those two photos. Light to moderate defoliation is caused when only tops of the trees are affected. And you can see some red needles on top of those trees. When it's severe, and on the bottom picture there, you can see that the entire trees are pretty much red and the needles will fall off on the same year. So those pests will not kill the tree immediately. It takes about 5 to 7 years of consecutive defoliation, repeated defoliation every year for the trees to actually die. But we see this pest being very active here in the north across the Mackenzie Delta. And I'll show you in the next graph here the history of what we've been seeing. So basically, as you can see, we started monitoring this pest as late as in late 50s. And we have a continuous record of this pest going up to actually current times. So it's easy to actually have a pretty good baseline showing where this pest have occurred in the past and how it's been spreading. And you can see thresholds there. We've been seeing it further and further north. And what we mean by seeing it, we see actually damage caused by it that can be observed from the plane. So we're talking here about massive outbreaks that actually are moving north. We know that this pest has been present in all of these places as an endemic species, which means that it exists in the environment without causing any damage or visible disturbance. But once in a while, we know those outbreaks happen in the cycles, in a regular, healthy environment, ecosystem. What we are seeing here is that we started seeing this pest in places where it hasn't been recorded before, since 50s. So basically, there is a progress north, clearly visible from our long-term data. So in 2015, we saw this massive outbreak in the Mackenzie Delta. Interestingly, next year, so it was last year, 2016, that outbreak collapsed, which just shows us how dynamic this environment still is. The next pest, which is also very serious in the south, and it's controlled extensively, is forest ant caterpillar. We had only one recorded outbreak in the mid-90s in the Liard Valley, but now, starting 2014, we see this pest again very active in the Northwest Territories, and I'm talking here about Slave River area as particularly infested. Over 100,000 hectares were mapped as defoliated. So you can see on the picture on the bottom there, these are defoliated trees by forest ant caterpillar. And again, it doesn't cause immediate mortality. Those aspen trees will recover because they are able to regrow the leaves later in the season. However, repeated defoliation will cause definitely a decline in trees. Now we go into climate-related impacts and talk about secondary pests. There's a lot of pests that in the south are considered secondary. They don't create a lot of impact to industry, wood industry in the south. However, those pests that are considered secondary in the south, they become pretty important up here. There are ongoing outbreaks of pests like aspen serpentine leaf miner and willow blotch leaf miner. So those two pics that you see there. Basically, aspen leaf miner causes defoliation of aspen leaves, and it leaves a specific pattern on the leaves, similar to a maize. You may be familiar with this pattern up close. When looked from the air, those leaves appear gray, and basically it's really difficult to find a healthy aspen right now in the Northwest Territories during the growing season. You will see thousands or even 100,000s of hectares affected by this pest. And this outbreak is ongoing for at least 20 years, so this is something unusual. Those outbreaks don't usually last that long. Usually it's a few years and then they just back off. Not here, not up here. They definitely enjoy it here. Willow blotch leaf miner is a similar, not a very highly impacted causes, but those outbreaks in the willow have been present here for at least 20-25 years. And we see them across the range, which means that basically whenever you find aspen and willow, you will find those pests, which is pretty incredible. New pests that we've seen and record every year. We see pests like eastern larch beetle, which is the middle bottom picture, or false hemlock looper, a top right picture in Fort Smith, gray willow leaf beetle. Those are minor pests. They're not causing much damage, but the fact that we see them here up north makes us think that the conditions became favorable enough for these pests to actually move in from the south. I want also to draw your attention to the top left picture, which shows a drought-weakened mature jack pine killed by white-spotted sawyer beetle. White-spotted sawyer beetle is a beetle that feeds normally on dead wood, basically fire-killed wood. That's what it feeds. However, in our drought-impacted forest, we started seeing it attacking live trees that are just weakened by drought. So this is a change in behavior that you normally wouldn't see in the south again. So weakened trees, mature trees that would normally defend itself against this pest are now impacted. What else? Northern turned caterpillar. These are all pests that have not been recorded here before, but now we start seeing them. It's hard to talk about climate change without talking about fires. I know you'll have a separate session on fires specifically tomorrow. So I want just to make one point here that we do see changes in this fire regime. And one of the most spectacular changes, I think, is shown here in the bottom picture, which is called, that picture shows short interval reburns in Wood Buffalo National Park. What you see here basically is an area that burned 1 year, and after only 5 or 10 years, it reburned again. So whatever region was there, or whatever remains of the vegetation were there, got reburned. This is dangerous from the ecological point of view because we don't know what kind of forest, if any forest, will regenerate after a disturbance that was so severe. So basically, those are things that we've been observing here in the past with the droughts present and temperature warming. We see those fires behaving a little bit different than they would normally do. This is a concern for communities also because something that was considered a fire break in the past, like for example a wet area around community, with the prevalent droughts, it stops acting like a break. It now burns through. So those are concerns that climate change brings with it. So drought, again, this is a disturbance that we see, or occurrence of the drought we see across the territories, across different species. You can see it affects all the species, all different ages, not only young species, but also mature forests. And we actually see it all across the territories. It's hard to map it. It's actually impossible to map it because it's patchy, and there's definitely, any place you go, you will see droughted trees. What's really interesting is that this droughted trees show symptoms of drought even when their conditions improve. So it takes a few years for those trees to actually recover. And when you have another drought occurring within this recovery period, those trees actually may be affected and mortality can occur. Aspen decline is another thing that we see that we can really associate with any pest, especially shown here are some effects of high water table that we see in the landscape. So basically you see edge effect, high water table affecting upland aspen forest where it is adjacent to the lowland feature that it's basically flooded. So you can see those shifting water tables actually flood edges of those upland features, and those trees at the edge die. You can also see on the bottom picture a phenomenon called drunken forest. This is again something that happens in black spruce forest, but also in aspen we see here. When you enter this forest, you'll see the water standing on the bottom, which means that the roots lose stability. They're basically lack of oxygen cause these trees to die off and lose stability, and they fall in different directions. That's why it's called drunken forest. Aspen islands dying across the landscape, that's something that we see. We're not sure exactly what causes it, but this is something that it's been observed. Large-scale flooding mortality is another thing that we've been observing quite a bit recently. This is a place just north of Fort Providence, and over 20,000 hectares have been flooded. We're not sure when it started. We think it started approximately 20 years ago, this process. And I show you why. If you look at the map of the area and overlay some fire history, you can see that the Horn Plateau, which is right north of this place, has been affected by some very serious fires in the mid-90s. And it's quite possible that the permafrost that was present on slopes of Horn Plateau and in the Horn Plateau basically thawed, and the water drained into this Horn River basin. So what we see right now is it could be an effect of those large fires in the 90s, or it could be combined effect of permafrost thawing in the general area. So there's probably a lot of different things going on there that we're not certain about. Again, if you go into that on the ground, look at the conditions in those affected forests. This is the same place, just accessed from the highway. You can see a high water level present in those areas, so basically telling you that this place is just flooded. Other related climate-related impacts include slumping that we see a lot of in forested areas, like on the shore of the Mackenzie River, a red belt, the phenomenon called the winter injury west of Norman Wells. We see it every year. So this is something that actually starts affecting condition of those forests on the slopes of the Mackenzie Mountains. Increased mortality following those spruce bloodworm outbreaks that I told you about before. We see more trees being affected sooner than it would usually happen. And the drunken black spruce forest by Scotty Creek, the same phenomenon as I showed you in the aspen forest. So basically, trees lose stability due to permafrost dying. So in summary, what we see is that we do see northwest past range shifts, and the last decade has been particularly active, intense in this, in when we see those observations. We do see changes in behavior of secondary pests, so we see some prevalent outbreaks, but we also see a change of behavior, like white spotted soy beetle feeding on live trees instead of dead trees. So this is a change that we've been observing. Changes in fire regime, short interval reburns I told you about. Excess and lack of water appear to be a major problem, or there's even flooding or drought, those two extremes next to each other. And effects of permafrost thawing are difficult to capture, diagnose at the landscape level, because you need a long-term monitoring really to be able to say that something is going on in those forests, and you can never be sure that it's just a permafrost thawing effect. It could be fire that happened 20 years ago that is impacting the landscape right now. So those are some of the challenges and conclusions. Changes in the natural disturbance regimes may be very subtle and require long-term monitoring. This is what we've been trying to do. However, limited resources only allow us to do that much, so pretty much reconnaissance type of survey. There are likely many things that we don't capture, of course, using those surveys. So there are other methods needed, like remeasuring some forest mensuration plots, track growth changes, for example, to track growth changes in those repeated measurements. We could probably use remote sensing techniques, but we're just not aware of suitability of those and how effective they can be in monitoring those changes. We need to learn more about that. And of course, the area is so large that assessing and quantifying those issues is very challenging. And using standard survey methods is maybe not sufficient. So what we need is more integrated approaches to understand those effects on climate. So I would like to give thanks to many partners that contribute to our forest health program, and I mentioned the Canadian Forest Service, and Roger Brett is a major contributor there. He visits us every year to help us with the surveys. And our ENR regional collaborators, they also are very helpful in coordinating and logistics on site when we have to collect samples and do some local work. And I would also like to direct you to our two publications that we produce each year. Basically, 2016 Forest Health Report and Forest Health News are available on our ENR website. You can download them from there. It details all the observations and monitoring from each year that we do. And if you have any questions, you can always get in touch with me, and I will be happy to help answer any questions.